Dr. Ornberg, Population Wellness, continuing the journey of discovery from addiction to recovery. This is part 2 of the slide set.
Psychological aspects of addiction. It's important to understand the difference between psychiatry and psychology. Psychiatrists are physicians, medical doctors, or doctors of osteopathy. They prescribe medications to correct abnormal brain chemistry as reviewed above. They tend to place an emphasis on neurochemical modifications of one's emotional and mental problems and state. They do, however, engage in some forms of talk therapy. Psychologists, on the other hand, generally have a doctorate, a PhD, in what can be considered talk therapy, which involves discussion with the patient, diagnosis forming, and a variety of different types of talk therapy to help the patient come to an understanding of different perspectives, ideas, beliefs, and ultimately feelings and behaviors. Psychological theories on why addiction happens. Addicts may engage in harmful behaviors because of concurrent mental illness. They may learn unhealthy behavior in response to their environment. Thoughts and beliefs create feelings, which in turn determine behavior. If thoughts, beliefs, and feelings are unrealistic or dysfunctional, behavior may be affected. Psychologists assume these theories apply in some way to addiction. People with these disorders might include cognitive difficulties, mood disturbances, and other mental illnesses. Addiction and other mental health disorders commonly occur together, a concept known as comorbidity. Half of the people seeking addiction treatment will have another significant mental health disorder. Many who suffer from addiction have attempted to self-treat their mental illness with available psychoactive substances, drugs, to ease their suffering. It's impossible to get somebody with comorbid conditions into good, stable, long-term, successful recovery if these other issues are ignored. That's why in our practice, we try to uncover as much as we can about what else may be going with the patient's mental, emotional, and behavioral state so that we can come up with a diagnosis of other forms of comorbid illness that need to be treated and then treat them appropriately with the right medications, not necessarily street drugs. Examples of emotional and mental disorders commonly comorbid with addiction include attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, anxiety, bipolar disorder, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and various forms of trauma, including psychological trauma. The addictive personality, a set of personality traits that predispose an individual to developing addictions. This hypothesis states that there are common elements among people with varied addictions that relate to personality traits. There are several distinct personality disorders listed in the Diagnosis and Statistical Manual, Edition 5, which is the basic handbook of psychiatry and psychology that codifies all emotional and mental health disorders. Review of this document, however, reveals an absence of addictive personality disorder. There are, however, basic, informal, non-coded personality traits associated with addiction, including denial of obvious problems, problems with emotional regulation, and problems with impulse control and regulation. Psychotherapy attempts to identify and resolve underlying psychological disorders. Self-realizations and help from a qualified therapist can help uncover some of these issues. The therapeutic relationship of the patient with the therapist is critical to ensuring enough trust is present that difficult issues can be explored. Absolute honesty and diligence is required for success in any such form of therapy. Locus of control. Recognition and acceptance of personal responsibility for problems and their solutions bring to the surface deeper underlying issues. Do we see ourselves as internally directed, responsible for our own actions, or externally directed? Things just happen because they happen. We don't have much responsibility for the major events of our lives. Fate or karma seems to be the main driving force. There is a brief online test that can help determine which locus of control you believe in. This link is available in the PowerPoint presentation and the outline on the website. Nobody is entirely internally or externally directed. Generally, though, we will have a predominant belief in one versus the other as having control in our lives. Theories regarding responsibility for addiction. The medical model, people are not responsible for creating or solving their own problems. The compensatory model, people are not responsible for creating but are responsible for solving their own problems. The moral model, people are responsible for creating and solving their own problems. The enlightenment model, people are responsible for creating but not solving their own problems. What's the best way to make sense of all of this? Since we've established the genetic, biologic, medical basis of addiction and the fact that none of us can choose our parents or genetic makeup, it seems that the compensatory model fits. People are responsible for solving but not creating their own problems, thus the compensatory model. Yet, who among us hasn't behaved in a manner that worsened our addiction, made poor choices, leaving us to consider other options? We've established the biological nature of this illness, which makes the moral model less likely. Wouldn't it be great if we were not solely responsible for fixing the mess that we made of our lives? This line of thought leads us to an answer. Spiritual and moral aspects of addiction. Addiction is a disease with much more than fascinating anatomy and physiology, pharmacology, and behavioral aspects. It's also very much a spiritual disease. Like any other disease, it's essential to evaluate and treat every aspect of the disease before it can be subdued and controlled. Moral aspects of addiction. There's a difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is the belief in and worship of superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. Ideas about the relationship between science and religion, a particular system of faith and worship, or a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. Spirituality, on the other hand, is a much broader concept with room for many perspectives. Extracorporeal simply means without a body, non-physical. In general, it includes a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves. It typically involves a search for meaning in life. As such, it's a universal human experience, something that touches us all. This is transcendence, an existence or experience beyond the normal or physical level. Moral, this concept of spirituality is different and much more simple than religion. Agnosticism or atheism does not need to be an obstacle to recovery from addiction. All of the 12-step programs use the concept of a higher power. Some people choose God, some don't, and still get sober. This higher power is whatever an individual addict chooses it to be for himself or herself. It does not need to be God. The USSR adopted the AA program referring to GOD as group of drugs or drunks or addicts, despite their strongly professed atheistic state policy. Stanley Miller did an experiment demonstrating the possibility of creating organic compounds by applying energy to a primordial stew of simple chemicals. Carl Sagan once wrote that the odds against a specific human genome being assembled by chance is 1 times 10 to the 2 millionth power. It seems very unlikely that humanity came into existence solely by chance. The purpose of evil spirits. Addiction is a progressive disease. It is a disease of yets. Name your poor outcome or bottom. It simply has not happened yet. Even with periods of abstinence followed by later relapse, the depth of the relapse will be much worse than the status at the earlier stage of addiction. Abstinence means not indulging in a substance or behavior. This is not the same as recovery. Recovery is essentially the restoration of mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health. Addicts use to feel better. Imagine being able to feel better without the need to use. Addicts at some level realize they are different from, quote, normal, unquote, people, the normies. This difference is actually a gift. The gift of addiction means that we need to work harder for the spiritual connection and other normies seem to require. Sadly, in this culture, very few people recognize the need for that connection. Addicts do not have that luxury. When we actively pursue that connection with our higher power, whatever we conceive the higher power to be, we get incredible blessings or gifts for the extra effort required. Choosing to not pursue this connection is our death sentence, a death that is eternal to our soul. Addiction and recovery. Recovery is a process. It takes time. It's a process of growth. Our spiritual self is always moving, either to greater recovery or backsliding toward a relapse in addiction. There is no such thing as standing still. We must continually work the program. The rewards of this program. Addiction causes distorted perceptions, not only when somebody is high, stoned, or abusing the drug, but even before the drug has ever been tried. Addicts and alcoholics see things differently and react differently. The first use of the substance seems to let the genie out of the bottle, accelerating the course of this disease of addiction. Addicts use these distorted perceptions to make decisions. These decisions are not always good and often lead to less than desirable results. Emotional growth is thought to stop at the age at which use starts as far as illicit drugs are concerned. This is even more pronounced with drugs such as THC and marijuana that affect the prefrontal cortex in the brain where judgment and impulsivity reside. In short, addicts end up with changes in the brain that are best described as a form of brain damage. A quick story here is in order. I'm going to talk about Adam and Chris. Adam came in as an opiate addict. He wanted help. Ended up on Suboxone. He seemed to do okay. I took care of him for about a year, and he said, "Would you be willing to see my brother Chris?" Sure, what's his problem? Well, he uses cocaine. Yeah, by all means, send him in. I'll be happy to see him. When Chris came in, he looked terrible. He looked very, very sick. He was just in really bad shape. Chris was otherwise a good-looking guy, about 5'5", blonde hair, tanned, muscular, well-developed. He had his master's degree in oceanography, specifically oceanographic topography. He was wanted up and down to the east coast of North America. He used to specialize in mapping the seafloor in preparation for beach restoration projects. He had his master's degree. He worked very hard. He was making a good income, but then he started using drugs on the job. A further history revealed that he worked a lot on offshore heavy equipment barges where there was a lot of welding and other metal work, as well as a very risky environment to work in. He had seen a couple of people cut in half when steel cables had broken and whipped back and hit them. He had been exposed to metal fumes. Suspicious, I did a chelation therapy on him and I collected his urine, which revealed that he had a huge burden of toxic heavy metals in his system. We started chelation therapy to get rid of these heavy metals, and as we did so, he gradually improved. I'd also put him on medication to help with his addiction, medication-assisted therapy, which we specialize here at Blue Ridge Family Medicine. As he slowly got better from the poisoning from the metal, he went from sleeping 22 hours a day to 20 hours a day to 18 hours a day and so on. His sleep requirements gradually diminished as the metals cleared from his body. He took very well to recovery. He never relapsed. He got right off of the cocaine. Probably he was using all the addictive drugs therapeutically so he could try to stay awake and alert in a dangerous working environment. He did have addictive tendencies, but I think his main problem was the metals. So as Chris continued to get better, he got to the point where he was able to get a job, and he worked as a dive master on a recreational dive boat. So every once in a while, we'd come in from his visit, he'd bring a cooler full of frozen lobster tails as a thank you gift. A very well-remembered patient for many reasons, not the least of which was the lobster. Meanwhile, his brother Adam, who had been quite obese, took a trip to India where he had gastric bypass surgery done. It was cheaper than having it done in the United States as he had no insurance. He came back, I took the staples out. He seemed to be doing well. Chris said that he was really not in recovery, but every time I did a urine test, he had the expected results. Finally, one Friday evening, I got a phone call from his mother, and as it turned out, Adam had gotten himself into some trouble, and there had been a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Adam, it turned out, had gone to jail. He had been to jail because he had robbed a bank. What had happened is he had been using his opiates, ran out of money because he wasn't getting enough of the Suboxone that he was selling to get as much heroin as he wanted. Remember, this is a progressive disease. He robbed a bank. On the way home, he burglarized several homes in the neighborhood where police officers lived. And he ended up going to jail for bank robbery and burglary. He still had the jacket he wore to the bank on in the front seat of his car when the police came by to arrest him. The SWAT team took him away. His mother explained it was all just a terrible misunderstanding, full denial with her codependence and the depth that his addiction disease had brought him to. This is how addiction distorts perception. There's a phrase that I love. I did not get in trouble every time I used, but every time I got in trouble, I had been using. And this truly is illustrative of what Adam went through. Chris, on the other hand, got the metals out of his system and ended up going back to work in his chosen profession and never had problems with drugs again. Having been bitten once, he never returned. Two heads are better than one. Collective brain power. Two heads can be a good defense, but where do you get these two heads? Well, the 12-step meetings. You look for the group members with a better long-term sobriety. Get to the meeting well before the meeting starts for the informal meeting before the meeting, which may be in the parking lot. Stay afterwards for the meeting after the meeting. The folks who go to these meetings now are the same folks who used to be the life of the party. They insist on having a good time. They love to laugh and kid around. They know that they cannot keep their own gift of recovery without giving it away to newcomers whenever the opportunity arises. Newcomers are helping them by showing up at meetings. They will insist that the above is true. They really mean it. Even if you're not welcome anywhere else, they will welcome you warmly. Tolerance is defined by either of the following: need for markedly increased amounts of the substance to achieve intoxication or the desired effect, or a markedly diminished effect with continued use of the same amount of the substance. Withdrawal is manifested by either the characteristic withdrawal syndrome for a given substance, or the same or closely related substance is taken to relieve or avoid withdrawal symptoms. The substance often is taken in larger amounts over a longer period of time than intended, largely due to tolerance. There is also a persistent desire or unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control substance abuse. The diagnostic criteria. A great deal of time is spent in activities necessary to obtain the substance, such as visiting multiple doctors or driving long distances. Use of the substance frequently, such as with chain smoking, or time taken to recover from the effects of the substance. Important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up with or reduced because of use of the substance. The substance use is continued despite knowledge of having a persistent physical or psychological problem that is likely to have been caused or exacerbated by that substance. For example, current cocaine use, despite recognition of cocaine-induced depression or an ulcer in the nose being made worse by the illicit consumption. Legal problems related to abuse. I'm sure there's more than one of us here who's had a DUI or other issues, even spousal abuse or marital conflict, all sorts of different problems, medical problems related to abuse. Addiction has genetic underpinnings, strong effects on the family. If one parent is susceptible to addiction, whether they choose to use or not, there's a 50% chance that the offspring will have that gene. Actually, it's not a single gene or numerous genes that carry the addiction genes, characteristics. If both parents carry the gene, the chances of passing it on are closer to 100%. The genetics of addiction probably involve numerous genes that are thus complex and not yet fully understood. A review of family history will often reveal members of the family tree who were alcoholic, addicted, suffered from emotional and mental disorders, or died early. Suicide is often associated with addiction. Recall that mental health is a very new field of study. Even a generation ago, somebody may have been considered not right in the head, or avoided, if not outright shunned, and not talked about in family. Obviously, the addict's behavior has wide-ranging effects on not only the immediate nuclear family, but often on the more extended family of aunts, uncles, cousins as well. Many families with the presence of addiction attribute addictive behaviors to normal. It's the only behavior we've ever known. Families and people are thought to only be as sick as their secrets, and we learn at a tender young age that there are certain things we just don't talk about outside the family. Codependence can be considered another aspect of addiction. Family members enable the addict. Once an addict is addicted to the other addict, they are enmeshed in their codependence, calling in sick for them when they're unable to attend to their responsibilities due to effects of the substance behavior or withdrawal, tolerating and hiding unacceptable behavior. Accepting unacceptable behavior makes that behavior acceptable. Divorce and failed relationships are often due directly or indirectly to addictive behaviors. This may be frustration in dealing with the ism of alcoholism or drugism. Ism basically means I, self, me. I'm not much, but I'm all I think about. Such behavior has its limits and is rarely tolerated forever. The single most important predictor of successful long-term recovery is the motivation of the patient. The addict must put the recovery ahead of everything else in their lives. If they start to falter, slow, or stop aggressively working the program of recovery and putting it ahead of everything else in their lives, they will lose it. If they think their job and income is more important, that job and money will be lost with their next relapse. If they think a relationship with spouse, children, parents, siblings, friends is more important, those important people in your life will leave with the relapse. Early recovery demands all of your attention. The patient in the intensive care unit needs to concentrate on getting better. Early recovery is a lot like being in the ICU. When an ICU patient improves, they are eventually transferred to a lower level of care in the hospital until they are able to leave the hospital. Recovery is just like that. Early, for at least the first year or until the 12 steps are worked under the guidance of a good sponsor, the addict should consider themselves to be. In the ICU of recovery, you should be going to frequent 12-step meetings. At least 90 meetings in 90 days is recommended as a bare minimum when you start working the program. Paying attention at those meetings, looking for the person who every time they share, the recovering person feels like he or she wants what that addict badly needs and wants. Frequent contact with other recovering people, doing what is recommended by others in the meetings, choosing a sponsor, at least a temporary sponsor initially, following your sponsor's advice completely and religiously, knowing full well that your sponsor is saving your life. Being totally honest, which will improve over time. The truth comes out like total honesty. You can't handle the truth, Jack Nicholson was famously known to have said. Early in recovery, the truth would overwhelm you. The truth comes out over time. This is a gift. Time takes time. Later in recovery, you will learn to balance and include family, friends, career, money, and integrate everything all around your recovery program and your spiritual development. This cannot be stressed enough. There's a lot to be said about having the addict take responsibility, financial and otherwise, for their own recovery. Perhaps giving it to the family member or employee as a gift the first time can be considered as far as going into a treatment center. After that, however, responsibility includes paying your way. Those who are constantly being given a free everything have no skin in the game. Recovery is therefore worthless to the mind of the addict. It didn't cost him anything. The second most important point to make then is that no matter how much you care for or love your addict, tough love may be the only thing that works. The addict must want to get better for themselves. They cannot and will not get better for somebody else, no matter what they say. Addiction is a disease of dishonesty and of self-will run riot. Terminal selfishness. Recovery is a lot like sex. If you're not having a great time, you're doing something wrong. Mental. It'll take time for the distortions in the fog to clear. Comorbid dual diagnosis conditions need to be diagnosed and treated properly in the early phases of treatment. The diagnosis and need for treatment with medications may change through the course of recovery. Addiction mimics every mental illness. A prudent therapist won't give anybody a firm mental health diagnosis until at least of recovery, not merely abstinence is passed. Insanity. Repeating the same behavior expecting a different outcome. Albert Einstein came up with that one. The more time in recovery that passes while working the full program of recovery, the more socially, morally balanced and integrated we become. We will not regret our past nor wish to shut the door on it. Emotional. Feelings are not facts, and facts are not feelings. Addiction distorts and masks our emotions and feelings. Addicts frequently don't know what they're feeling. Many addicts don't fully understand what they're feeling at any given moment. Users typically done to take the pain away. This also numbs the normal, natural feelings that we have. Feelings are neither good nor bad, they just are. Emotional growth appears to stop at the time of the initial use of the addictive substances. Think of a 30-year-old person with the emotional depth of a 15-year-old. Spiritual. Those who choose to cultivate a religious belief typically progress farther and faster in their recovery. It's been asked of me, how quickly do I have to do those 12 steps on that window shade in the meeting room? The answer is, how soon do you want to feel better? Even the agnostic should consider this fact and reconsider their belief or lack of belief and become open-minded to changing their opinions on the definition of a higher power. Remember that addiction is a me disease with a we solution. It's a simple but not easy program. It is only for those who want it, not for those who need it. Because of this, we cannot accomplish recovery alone. It requires a group dynamic. This is a simple program for addiction ravages the body. The exact organs damaged often depend on the substances and behaviors indulged in. Intravenous drug abusers increase the risk of HIV and hepatitis, liver inflammation, often viral, as well as heart infections. Alcohol damages virtually every organ and system in the body. Tobacco damages the lining of airways, lungs, and blood vessels. Complete cessation of abuse is absolutely crucial and mandatory for physical recovery. It's not uncommon for miraculous physical recovery to occur among those who work the full recovery program. Many treatment centers will ban smoking to stop all addictions in one treatment. This isn't done by all of them, is somewhat controversial, but is not a bad idea. The 12-step program is the backbone of all recovery programs. True recovery integrates, coordinates, and improves all of the domains. Medications can be used to assist, but they only assist in the recovery process. Medications treat the biologic, medical aspect of the bio-psychosocial, spiritual aspect of addiction. When dealing with addiction, which is truly a lethal, terminal, progressive disease, it's best to use every tool available, all simultaneously. Jails, institutions, and death are the ultimate and usually premature outcome of this cunning, baffling, powerful, ruthless, and lethal disease. Addiction truly is a terminal illness. Reasons for addiction continuation change over time, remember. Early, it feels good. Its use is impulsive. Later, it's a habit. It's compulsive. Finally, it's like dancing with that 800-pound gorilla. I hate it, and I can't stop because it hurts too much to try to stop. Pain is a very good thing, however. When what you're doing hurts more than the pain of the thought of changing, you will change. And until you really come to that conclusion and fully, truly decide for yourself that you want to change, change will not happen. That's why I repeat, the most important aspect for recovery to be successful is the motivation of the person seeking recovery. It's important to understand in this disease model that abuse of the drug or behavior is also only a symptom of the underlying problem. We use to feel better. That means there's something wrong with us. We don't feel good normally. Recovery gets us to feeling good normally. The behavior is just a coping mechanism to deal with this underlying feeling of dis-ease. Recovery entails fixing the problem at its root cause. Recovery entails working the program of recovery. Recovery is a verb. Addiction recovery has a few vitally important concepts. It is a me disease with a we solution. It is impossible to get sober alone, with your distorted perceptions leading to faulty choices. It's a simple but not easy solution and program. It's a simple program for complicated people. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help on a huge and difficult task. Would you be sitting here reading this if you had not gotten clean and sober by yourself? So that repeating the same behavior, expecting a different outcome, expecting to get sober, straight, clean by yourself, that's another definition of example of your insanity. It works if you work it. So work it because you're worth it. Sponsorship. By going to meetings regularly, in part looking for that person who, every time they share, you respect what they have and you want what they have in terms of emotional sobriety, mental and emotional health, wisdom, the peace that they have just attracts you to them. Ask that person to sponsor you. It's truly a great compliment to that person. You're telling that person how much you admire them and want to be like them when you ask them to sponsor you. You work the 12 steps only as guided by your sponsor. You do not do this alone. The sponsor's job is to guide the sponsee through the 12 steps of the program, not just to be there to listen to the complaints and bitching about how tough life is. Your sponsor is not your bank. It's not your marriage counselor, therapist, doctor. This is not to be confused with working my program. My program, my best thinking got me into this mess. The program is what has worked for others, many worse off than you are. Stick with the winners. Do what has been proven to be successful. The 12-step program has the best documented and longest running success rate of any type of addiction recovery. Addiction is a disease of self-will run riot. You note that self-will means you cannot work my program, which is another example of self. Self-will, it's a terminal selfishness, narcissism, ISM. I, self, me. I'm not much, but I'm all I think about. This is one of the most common denominators. Addiction is also a disease of dishonesty to self and to others. Denial. Don't even know I am lying. I could lie to myself so easily about this. I can certainly lie to others about having a disease, about the fact that I think I can stop anytime I want, but yet you haven't yet, despite the numerous problems in your life, directly or indirectly related to this illness, you still use. Dishonesty to others, lies of omission, leaving out pertinent information, lies of commission, active deceit, hiding. Hiding the truth, hiding your stash, hiding the amount of abuse, hiding the frequency of abuse, minimizing the amount used, denial about outcomes related to the abuse, denial to others and to yourself. How the 12-step program works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our story is to close in a general way, what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these, we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol and drugs, cunning, baffling, powerful, ruthless, and lethal. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures avail us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Many have exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description to the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. That we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, and that God could and would if he were sought. The 12 promises of recovery and the 12 rewards of recovery are about the only dishonest part of this program of really rigorous honesty. And the reason they're dishonest because they're so hugely understated. Recovery is, again, it's not about not using. It's about having such a great life that you don't want to use. Imagine being able to attain the peace of mind and relaxation that in the past required using and abusing substances and behaviors, but being able to do so without abusing and to live peacefully in that state forever. The 12 promises. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity. We will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see our experience can benefit others. The feelings of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. This intuitively know, this is an inspiration. This is essentially God speaking to us. We can figure out and get out of the situations that used to bog us down and tie us up so badly, and we can do it effortlessly. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. The 12 rewards of recovery: hope instead of desperation, faith instead of despair, courage instead of fear, peace of mind instead of confusion, self-respect instead of self-contempt, self-confidence instead of helplessness, the respect of others instead of their pity and contempt, a clean conscience instead of a sense of guilt, real friendship instead of loneliness, a clean pattern of life instead of a purposeless existence, the love and understanding of our families instead of their doubts and fears, the freedom of a happy life instead of the bondage of addictive obsession. 12-step programs such as Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. Addiction encompasses alcohol and all the other drugs that are abused, as well as numerous behaviors. When attending an AA meeting, it's best to introduce yourself as an alcoholic. You may wish to say that drugs were also part of my problem. At an AA meeting, the term addict is generally preferable to alcoholic. Again, the middle of the road term, I'm an alcoholic and drugs are part of my problem, works well in the AA meetings. Crossing the wrong term in the meeting attended may result in some grumbled comments from a member of the group, but if you will recall, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking or using. We're not in these meetings because we're so healthy, so when somebody complains about a term you used, remember that. We're there because we're not all there. There are a variety of other 12-step meetings. There's meetings for sex and love addicts, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous. There are also meetings for the loved ones of the addicted. These meetings often will end with Anon, Al-Anon, Alateen, Narc-Anon, adult children of alcoholics, and CODA, Codependence Anonymous. Codependence is the term used for those who exhibit enabling behavior. This is a form of behavior meant to be helpful, but in the long run is actually harmful for the alcoholic or the addict. This can be thought of as another expression of addiction. That other person is hooked on the emotional state of the addict. They're very enmeshed and codependent on each other. An easy example would be the spouse calling in sick for the hungover alcoholic or addict so he or she does not get in trouble at work. The line between helpful and enabling is a very thin line that seems to move over time. It's very helpful to have another person who is not emotionally invested, a sponsor in the Anon program, to help the addict or the loved one of the addict to navigate and determine the best course of action in various aspects of the disease of addiction, codependence, and the interaction with their beloved. I cannot say this enough. There's a lot of people who will go to Narcotics Anonymous meetings and will also go to Narc-Anon, alcoholics who go to AA but also go to Al-Anon, and so on, because remember, addiction is a family disease. We're at these meetings because we're not right. Addicts tend to attract other addicts, so chances are you're attracted to these people. Your spouse may be one of these people. Remember that this is a genetic disease. Your parents or your children may be these people. So you're going to react to how they act. It's normal to react to other people. When your reactions are not healthy, it's nice to have somebody who's not emotionally invested in the relationship to be able to give you a little bit of an additional look, another perspective at how things are going with you and your loved one. These meetings for their loved ones also have their own 12 steps, their own sponsors for the family to work with. In a 12-step meeting, there will be the meeting before and the meeting after the meeting where folks hang out and chat. This is an ideal time to share what's going on in a newcomer's life. It's a great time to discuss problems, concerns, and plans to resolve the issues. The newcomer may come in and share with some of the experienced folks in the group, hey, here's what's going on with me, and here's what I plan to do about it. And of course, it may be an absolutely, totally crazy and off-the-wall solution because remember, we've got our distorted perceptions. We're doing the best we can to make decisions with these distorted perceptions. So after the other people standing around pick themselves up off the ground and stop laughing, then they may be able to give you some truly good advice that you would probably not have thought of any other way. Typically, the longer a person has been sober or clean, the better their overall mental and emotional health is. It's a good idea to attend meetings where there's as much long-term sobriety as possible. Some of these meetings can have hundreds of years of sobriety collectively in each meeting. If you've got 20 attendees with 5 years of sobriety each, that's 100 sober years. Same as 5 attendees with 20 years sobriety each. Ideally, the most long-term sobriety is the one that's preferred. Often there's more long-term sobriety in AA meetings than there will be in NA meetings. That's not an absolute, but it is seen. At the same time, triggers to relapse will be different between the two groups. There will be differences between addictions to various substances and activities. It's best to include the meeting best suited to any given person's predominant addiction, but it might not be a bad idea to dip your toe into some of the other meetings from time to time as well. Many folks have multiple addictions. Remember, if you're an addict and you prefer using, say, heroin, you still cannot safely drink. You can likely cross-addict. Cross-addiction refers to stopping the use of one addiction only to pick up on another. When an addict stops using a certain drug, that does not mean it's okay to use other emotional or mind-altering substances or behaviors. Cross-addicting to another substance or behavior is a very real danger. Even if the opiate addict who hates alcohol could very easily become an alcoholic if they dabble in using alcohol occasionally. Those addiction circuits we talked about earlier in your brain, they're still there. The dopamine feel-good transmitter is still ready to be released in the nucleus accumbens. It's still the final common outcome neurotransmitter for all of these addictive behaviors and substances. Remember that. As important as meetings and sponsorship are, they wouldn't be much good without the full 12 steps of the recovery program. The 12 steps. Step 1. We admitted we were powerless over drugs and alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. This is a we program. Nobody can get straight alone. We are in this together. Admitted, became aware, realized, recognized, and let it be known to others. Powerless, lack of control or ability to influence. Drugs, alcohol. This is the only mention of substances or behaviors in any of the 12 steps. Remember, use of a substance or behavior is only a symptom of the underlying problem. We ain't right. We need to have our brains washed. The 12 steps are the washing machine for our brains. The abuse is merely a symptom of our disease. Things are unmanageable. We are unable to cope, out of control. Step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Came to believe. A power, something supernatural. Back to the spiritual, but let's not call it God just yet. That term drives people who need help away, so let's use another power. That higher power admits to the possibility of something transcendent, even if it's only just the group of drugs or druggies. Restore, to replace what is lost. Sanity, the ability to think and behave in a normal and rational manner. Sound mental health. A trained behavioral scientist in 12-step meetings can make diagnosis of virtually every mental illness imaginable sitting in those rooms if they go to enough meetings. These diseases are all treated differently with medication and types of counseling and therapy, yet they all improve by working the 12-step program. By the same measure, it's impossible to diagnose with certainty any mental illness in the disease of addiction until at least a year of true recovery has happened. This is another miracle of the program. Addiction can manifest as every known form of mental illness. Addiction amplifies and exaggerates these diseases as well. This is yet another example of the distortion caused by addiction. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. This is another key concept for recovery. This is very important. Decision, a choice freely made without coercion. Term our will and our lives. This is also huge. We've surrendered completely. We've given up trying to control our lives for ourselves. We do not know what's in our own best interests. This is acceptance of God's will in our life. The care of God, higher power, understanding that we are under its care, and all that it has care and concern for us, wishing us well, and that no matter how bad things seem to get, it will ultimately be in our best interest. I have what I call the 24-month rule. The worst things in my life that have ever happened to me, within 24 months, I can look at the event and see a bright silver lining to that big dark cloud that came into my life. If you're patient and you just wait, He makes roses bloom out of bullshit. In the 12-step programs, we share our experience, strength, and hope. We don't give advice or direction. My personal experience has been that my higher power, whom I choose to address as God, allows me to go through difficulties in life. Growth often involves pain. We are all made in the image and likeness of God. That is my personal belief. I also believe that these painful events in our life are the hammer, the anvil, and the fire that He uses to forge us in a more perfect example of His image. But He will only do this with our consent and our cooperation. I come out of these difficulties as a much stronger and better person than before the situation that He allowed me to have. My faith is much stronger after such a test. We can choose to violate the decision of His and try to run away from that lesson, but it will find us and probably be repeated a few more times in our lives just to make sure that we've truly learned that particular lesson. It's best to go through it the first time and not run for it. Since we've learned that addiction can mimic all known emotional and mental illness, it can be useful to think of this as one of the many miracles provided by the higher power, whatever you conceive that to be, but the one that you agreed to the existence of in step 2 above. Once we truly decide to turn ourselves over, the miracles of the promises begin. The miracles will continue as long as the program is practiced and shared with others, not my program, but the program. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This is the first action step. It involves pen and paper or keyboard. It will take a lot of time, work, reflection, and help from a good sponsor. Sometimes a good therapist may also be helpful or required. This involves a very thorough and complete moral inventory. Remember to get the good as well as the bad. Not just what you did right or wrong, but why you did so. That's where the therapist may come in. Certainly a good sponsor will help with that. This is more about the simple wrongdoing. It's about the underlying reason on why the wrongdoing happened. Without being completely thorough and honest on this step, future relapse is likely. This will also form the basis for the 8th and the 9th. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. God, it's okay to use higher power if preferred. Another human being, it's essential to communicate this information derived from step 4 to another person. Often, but not necessarily your sponsor. Ideally, often the other person, perhaps your sponsor, will share similar issues and experiences with the person doing the step, known as the sponsee. The exact nature involves not only the wrongdoing, but the underlying reason and motive behind it. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. The higher power from steps 2 and 3 is the source of this healing, restoration to sanity and revocation of mental illness. The compulsion to drink may be lifted with step 3, sometimes persistent longer, so it may resolve after step 6. Entirely ready means without reservations, no matter what may come. God, the higher power, removes these defects, but only with our unreserved consent and cooperation. Defects, faults, failures. Character, our most basic moral character. Step 7. Humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. When you have nowhere else to turn and are on your knees, turning to your higher power, you are at your strongest. This is done with the humble realization that we have not been able to heal ourselves. We admitted that our issues have been our shortcomings. Step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. After having done step number 4 with the realization of the harms done by our moral failings and faults, it's now time to start contemplating being able to make appropriate amends, and to whom. This also requires review with a good sponsor. It's not about apologizing, it's about making amends, and it's about becoming ready and willing to do so. Made. This is another action step. A list of all persons, everybody, and the list will include second-generation harms. We may have caused some harm to somebody who in turn caused to another after what we did to them. Became willing, in part because of having done the 5th step, willing to make amends to them all. Step 9. Made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Amend, to make better or improve. The U.S. Constitution has 27 amendments. Not one of them starts with an apology. Imagine driving a huge railroad spike into the middle of an expensive polished mahogany conference table. An apology would entail removing the spike, leaving a large hole. An amend is to fix the table in a manner satisfactory to the owner of the table. Except when to do so would involve injury to them or especially to others. You do not want to injure other people. An example would be undiscovered fidelity. If you insist on the cheater to go back to their spouse who is ignorant of the affair and tell them what had happened, this would just breach distrust in the relationship. If the victim of the spouse was ignorant of the wrongdoing, it's best not to expose and cause pain. If there has truly been a change, the future transgressions are quite unlikely. Now, if this change has not happened, give it time, and hopefully with growth it will improve. The amends process is to heal you, not the other person. It releases you from a spiritual bondage, a form of guilt toward that other person. Step 10. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Continued means that this is an ongoing process, often done at the end of each day with a daily review or reflection, especially regarding any problems that may have occurred and how they were responded to. When we were wrong, recognized we had committed a transgression, promptly admitted it without delay, and made amends as soon as possible. Step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Sought, we continue daily to pursue our higher power in whom we've entrusted ourselves without reserve. Prayer and meditation. This is not medication, this is meditation. Prayer can be thought of as transmission upward and upload of sorts to our higher power. Meditation is our reception, our download from the higher power. Improve our conscious contact acknowledges that we have to have conscious contact with our higher power. This is the essence of spirituality. We improve on a regular basis. It is a skill. It gets better with time. As we understood Him, remember, this is our own personal higher power that we chose in steps 2 and 3. The same one we turned our lives over to, the same one we chose to heal us, the same one who removed our shortcomings, including our compulsion to use, and who gave us the gift of recovery. Knowledge of His will for us. We are only to pray for that which He wants for us. We turned ourselves over to Him in step 3. This reinforces that decision. We acknowledge that He alone knows what is best for us and the power to carry that out. He alone gives us the power to do His will. He will provide us with the power to do His will. He is the miracle department. He has better plans for our life than we have for our own lives. Step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. We have already. It's a done deal. There is no more doubt about it being possible. It's an established fact by now. Spiritual awakening, established and continue to enhance and maintain our relationship with the transcendent, my higher power. Perhaps it is God, whatever you call Him. While many agnostics enter the 12-step programs, within 5 years, few of these folks continue to describe themselves as agnostic. Faith grows. Result of these steps. Clearly, this is the outcome of all the work we have done to date and our sacrifice of self in step 3 to our higher power's will. Carry this message. Carry to maintain with me, myself, and to convey to others. This message, the gift of recovery, the steps, the meetings, sponsorship, service work, fellowship, to anybody and everybody who wants it. This program is for those who want it, not for those who need it. We ourselves are living proof of this. We cannot demand anybody into this program. We can, however, command wordlessly people come into this program merely by our presence and our actions. Somebody with good recovery has a certain attractiveness to them. People recognize this. They don't explain it, they don't understand it, they can't put their finger on it, but they just know that there's something about a person in good recovery, and they tend to want to hang around. Therefore, the newcomer is the most important person in any meeting in this program, and in any meeting in the rooms as well. We have to give it away. We can't keep what we do not share. We cannot share without the newcomer. The newcomer is the most important person in any meeting. Therefore, you must continue this hospitality. Practice these principles in all of our affairs. We practice these daily. This is what we do. These principles are the 12-step program in all of our affairs. We don't pick and choose. This is our new way of life. Likely much different from our former way of life. The pillars of the 12-step programs. Self. We alone are responsible for our actions. Society, fellowship. We stand together and strive to interact with society at large. God, our higher power, the source of this miracle of our recovery. Service. Work to help each other. Freedom. The lifelong process of healing and growth. Goodwill toward others to promote recovery. Unity, we work together. Service provided to each other. Recovery, growth, both collectively as a whole and individually. It's a circle, it's a global. A few comments and meditations on the concept of relapse. There are no accidental relapses. They are always planned, consciously or subconsciously. You must remain vigilant against them. Beware of a surprise addiction attack. Remember, this is the power of evil that we deal with. This usually comes in the form of relaxing the intensity with which you work the, not your, program. Meeting makers make it. You can't save your ass and your face at the same time. If you relapse, you must make it known and you must start over. This is a disease that is cunning, baffling, powerful, ruthless, and lethal. The outcome is certain, but only after numerous chances to save your ass and perhaps brief life of utter misery. Jails, institutions, and death. You don't want to be fitted for a body bag or sport a toe tag. The promises of relapse. Number 1. If we were casual with this phase of our development, we will be using before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new imprisonment and a new misery. We will relive the past and won't be able to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word conflict and we will know pain. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we'll sink even lower. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will deepen. We will gain interest in selfish things and lose interest in our fellows. Self Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will suck. Fear of people and of economics and insecurity will multiply. We will intuitively know how to run from situations which never used to bother us. We will suddenly realize that God would have never done to us what we are doing to ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us. Some of us, those of us who are still using, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we use for them. Thank you for your time.